Welcome to React Native Radio. I'm your host, Nader Dabbit. Today on our show, we have a couple of special guests, and we're going to be talking about the process of getting your app to production, how to kind of take what you've learned, where you've built your React Native app, and actually get it to the App Store, and maybe kind of have a process or understand processes around getting it there consistently and how companies are actually doing that. And to talk about this, we have three special guests today: Ryan, Stelly, Cindy Lee, and Shyam, Komirishetty. Welcome to the show, everyone.
Hey, how's it going?
So I'm going to kind of go one by one and let you introduce yourselves. So Ryan, can you give us a quick intro and talk about, what you're currently doing at your job?
Sure, yeah. I'm the team lead at Rally Health for the UHC mobile application. So that's United Healthcare, the mobile app that we're building at Rally Health. Been with Rally a little over 4 years, kind of been working a number of things, mostly on the web. So this is kind of my first mobile app. Excited to be building that with React Native.
Cool. Cindy?
Hey, my name's Cindy Lee. I joined the React Native team here at Rally back mid-August. I think that was maybe like a week before our initial Android release. So it was coming in at a really exciting time. Yeah, I've been happy to be here since.
Cool. And then Shyam?
Hi, my name is Shyam Komirishetty, and I'm a senior software engineer with Rally Health, and I joined the team about 8 months ago, and this is my first mobile app.
Cool. So I know I'd talked to Ryan a little bit before the show started, and he kind of talked about how he came from a web background. I, too, came from a web background. I did a lot of stuff with mobile development as far as like mobile web applications and a little bit of cross-platform with Ionic and Cordova and things like that. And I found it interesting that I could take a lot of my knowledge and apply it to React Native. Can you kind of talk about how React Native was chosen at Rally Health and how you were able to apply kind of some of your existing skill set to that?
Yeah, for sure. So this is pretty recent endeavor at Rally. We were starting to build this app sometime about this time last year, and it was coming at a time where our main goal was we were wanting to realign some of the product development to get closer with the mobile development and the similar features in some of our web apps. So we were looking, basically for an opportunity to kind of close the gap between the product development across web and mobile. So React Native in particular was interesting as we were evaluating options because we were planning to through a kind of modernization process on the web front end, and React was a strong contender in that evaluation for web. So we did kind of a proof of concept that over a span of a week or so, a few engineers spent some time kind of wiring, spending the minimal effort to get kind of an app up and running, and kind of ended that with a little bit of presentation to product and engineers, and that I think was especially compelling to kind of like the product development cycle as we wanted to get closer to the same features being implemented in web and mobile. So kind of after our first launch on Android back in September of last year, we kind of got to start building new features and kind of fully realize that. So one of the big wins is that we have a separate team that's contributing to our core React Native code base. So one of the team essentially responsible for this claims feature where you can view medical claims, dental claims, all that stuff on the website. They had the opportunity to take that same development and build the same feature into the mobile app. So that's kind of one of the big goals that we've had that we've already kind of started to realize.
Now, was the mobile app that you're talking about, did you take an existing brownfield or existing in production application and apply React Native to it? Or were you taking out a brand new application and building it from the ground up?
So Rally had an app called Rally Care, which was a from the ground up, fully native on both iOS and Android. And this, new United Healthcare mobile app was kind of an evolution from a product standpoint of that Rally branded app. So the React Native app was a greenfield app, but it was influenced heavily by both the product design as well as the implementation of the native applications. So in many cases, it was almost reverse engineered, seeing how this feature was implemented on a native app, but the UHC mobile app is entirely greenfield React Native.
Very cool. I kind of like that idea, and I've been involved with some apps in the past that were taking existing native apps and kind of porting them over to React Native, or maybe coming up with a newer version and taking some of the old features. So pretty interesting process. But I guess since we're here to talk about shipping apps, really shipping React Native apps, can you talk about some of the differences that stood out to you or anyone on the team really between shipping web versus shipping mobile and React Native in particular?
Oh, man. Yes.
Yeah, this is a pretty big one usually.
Oh, yeah. So one of the big things, I guess, if you're putting hands to keyboard, the biggest thing, or I guess, bits to bits while doing an actual continuous integration build is, you look at the build image for, let's say a Create React app that runs an npm build. You've got Node on there, reference the default Node Docker image, let's say. Well, with React Native, it's, the Node tooling plus about, let's say like 8 gigs of JDK and Android build tools. So that was one of the biggest things was, okay, so we got stuff kind of running locally, set up from React Native docs is pretty good, but actually getting that to build in a continuous integration environment, that was one of the biggest things was figuring out how to, fully reproducible build from in a continuous integration environment. So what we did there was there was plenty of, so one of the first things that we looked at there was since we were building initially for Android, there was, thankfully we didn't have to involve ourselves with the, trying to virtualize OS X. We'll get to that later, I guess. So we were really just looking for, a out of the box Docker image that had all the Android stuff and all the Node stuff. So that actually ended up pretty well. I can link the one that we ended up using, and then some minor modifications to that. We were able to get a CI build up and running in our Jenkins pipeline.
Very nice. And then kind of what happens after the Jenkins build happens? And is this kind of something that happens whenever a new commit is merged into master, or is this something you only do when you're ready to kind of push a new version to the App Store?
We have some steps that run on just any commit that gets pushed to our GitHub repo. That's basically just making sure the tests work, making sure that the native build actually runs. And then, once the PR is approved and merged, then on every merge, we have an additional step that uploads that, eventual build to a service called Crashlytics Beta. And that's kind of like a pre-App Store, pre-Play Store, pre-beta, pre-test flight tool that's actually now being ported over to Firebase since they bought them. But that basically allows us to have every commit that gets merged to master generates a beta version of the app that any of our testers or product people or even developers can pull down and poke around with.
Is that kind of like an app that needs to be downloaded similar to Test Flight that then gives them the build, or how do they actually get a hold of that app? Because I'm kind of curious, I haven't used it yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's exactly that. It manages just basically, giving you the latest APK or IPA and prompting you when there's a new app available. It's a nice feature where you can add a changelog as well. So, between version 1.1.1-692 and -693, these PRs were merged. Here's the features you can test out that's fresh out of this version.
Okay. And have you all tested or used any of the over-the-air update stuff like Code Push or anything like that?
We have not. So yeah, that was definitely one of our, initial sales pitches is like, oh, when, this technology lets you do these over-the-air updates. We've been kind of in a heavy feature development mode, and I'd say our updates haven't needed to be as granular as that yet, but that is definitely on our radar.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. So you're kind of doing big releases and a lot of probably native code and things are involved, I'm guessing.
Right.
So what's your experience been like so far with Crashlytics? I know there's a couple of different tools out there for crash reporting. I know Crashlytics does a lot of other stuff as well, but what's your experience so far? Are you kind of liking it?
Yes, it's been great. It's been, we've been able to leverage the kind of the same tooling that the rest of the native teams at Rally use. So that's been nice. Definitely one limitation, and I'll let Cindy take over, is, the fact that, Crashlytics is for native mobile apps. So Cindy, I guess, do you want to touch on kind of what we have in place there for the rest of the story?
Yeah, for sure. So one of the issues that we were running into, and that we still sometimes run into, is not having source maps for the JS bundle. So I think that's one of the limitations of Crashlytics that we see. So we also rely on this other tool called Raygun to be able to get some source maps up for the JS code, so that we can more precisely identify where crashes and issues are coming from. I think this in itself is a little bit of a headache. Just being able to get the granular version source maps up requires a little bit of fiddling with, and not a lot of support on their platform. But at least for Android right now, we have a pretty good system up for getting version source maps up.
Very cool. Yeah, that seems to have been the issue that I had when I tried Crashlytics, but it's been a long time. Getting those JS debugging, those source maps, like you mentioned, any of those stack traces in JS in general just seemed to be kind of tough. I know I had a good experience with Sentry, but again, this was a long time ago, probably a year and a half ago.
This is definitely, high on our radar of looking for the ecosystem to improve. And I was actually just, I think a week or two ago, one of the guys working on the React Native wrapper for Firebase SDK, which the Crashlytics tooling is moving over to, I think teased some support for mixed stack traces, similar to how Sentry does them in the new Crashlytics / React Native Firebase wrapper. So that's one of the things that we're definitely excited about. The ray gun and source mapping stuff does pretty much solves our need, but it is one of the times where the kind of out of the box React Native packaging hasn't done exactly what we needed to do.
So what does the team look like for you all right now as far as the team that's working on React Native, and what is each person's, I guess, job within the app? I'm kind of curious because depending on the size of the team, I see all kinds of things. I see a single developer doing everything from writing code to doing the CI, CD, and everything like that. Of course, when you get to larger companies, you have people that are like dedicated to doing, more granular tasks. What does your team look like?
Sure, yeah. So we have a number of engineers working at Rally, and we also have been very, very, very lucky to work with a number of people from CallStack as well. So a lot of cool help from them. I think in terms of team split, I'd say that we're pretty generalized in terms of, I think everyone's comfortable with most pieces of the app to be able to pick up, anything. But, for example, Shyam's done a lot of the foundational and great work on some of our analytics instrumentation, which is kind of one of those like cross app patterns and almost kind of like a framework within the app. And then one of the biggest complex pieces of the app is that we have like a whole doctor search and filtering and map view and stuff. Yeah, I think that's probably one of the parts of the app where some specialization has happened. So I guess Shyam, yeah, if you wouldn't mind talking through some of the complexities of the of the search part of the app.
Yeah, I'd love to hear both the search and the analytics part from Shyam.
Sure. We support huge number of populations, like millions of people use our app. So it could be Medicare users, Medicaid users, or individual users. And apart from that, each user has a specific plan, and it gets quite complex from there. So based on their login type, their plan, the type of user, the search kind of differentiates what we need to show, like what kind of providers we need to show. Do we show them medical or behavioral health providers? So there are many aspects that's play into this. And for search, we had to investigate a lot. And it did indeed take a lot of time and effort and a lot of investigation as well to implement this.
So I'm kind of curious as far as like implementing search and it sounds like lists, like you may have a lot of lists views and things like that in your app. What's sort of limitations around performance did you run into and how did you mitigate that? I know a lot of times when you have large lists, depending on what you're rendering, you may have to do particular things within your app to make it performant.
Right. It depends on how much data we get. And sometimes we actually used to, like for hospitals, we used to render the physician directory. And this could be thousands and thousands of physicians that are being rendered. And this would eat up a lot of space and data, and this would slow up our app. So we had to do some optimizations for this, like how we render data and which parts are essential, and when we need to render certain pieces of this data. So we had to be quite clever about this and be careful on what we render at what time. So that was really crucial for our app.
What type of search implementation do you have as far as the backend is concerned? Just out of curiosity, do you have like Elasticsearch, or is it something that's just querying your database? I know with this sophisticated of a search product, it sounds like you have, I'm sure, some pretty interesting things going on.
So in terms of the search implementation that our app uses, it's leveraging the same search that what we call the Find and Price Care web app uses within Rally and United Healthcare, and that's backed by Elasticsearch. So in terms of us consuming that, we're basically just client developers of that. It's mostly just REST with query parameters.
So what is the process? I know we really did cover this a little bit at the beginning, but I think the thing that a lot of people have a hard time with is understanding the process of having your application in development and then getting it into the actual app stores. What are the steps from having your application being to a state where you feel like you're ready to ship a version? So for instance, you're at like version 2, but you want to have the step that tests that in some type of automated fashion, and then you want to actually get that into each of the App Store and the Play Store. What are kind of the steps that you all take or that people could, listen to you and get some advice on there?
I'll mention that since we kind of started with Android, our kind of configuration is influenced more by what we started with on that. And so we haven't had to do a ton of native development. I'd say most of the fiddling we've done on the native side has been on the build configuration. So when you do a React Native init out of the box, you'll see within that Android directory, inside of that app directory, there's a build.gradle, and that's where most of the build configuration comes into that out-of-the-box app. And it comes by default with two flavors, and that's the debug and release. So the different build profiles. So when you're doing, a React Native run Android, it'll by default be using that debug one. And if you do one of the release commands, which I'll mention in just a second, it'll use that release block. We have an additional flavor on top of that, which we call just the Play Store variant, which is kind of a lot of that release variant, but actually the one that we're ending up to actually put into the App Store. So with that release one, that's the one that gets built on our CI. So that's got, it's the actual build is signed with certificates. It's got minification enabled. The Android kind of equivalent of minimization / dead code elimination, which is called ProGuard. So ProGuard itself is, it's kind of a little bit of a beast. It strips away, a lot of the code that your app isn't using, but it's one of the things where when you add a new, let's say React Native dependency that has some native bridging, some native libraries, there might be some stuff you have to do with the ProGuard configuration. So we have, backing up a bit, when we actually build in CI, we have those two flavors of the app, the release one, that's what ends up going to, every build goes to QA, goes to product people. And then when we're actually gearing up for release, we'll use the App Store one, the Play Store one. So the differences there is that the biggest distinction we make between those is with those different flavors, you can change the package name to basically have multiple apps installed on a given phone. So with the different configurations we have between the release and the App Store build, the main distinction between those two practically is that we have different package names for those. So thinking of a package name, that's com.google.maps or something,
right.
And that's how your app is uniquely identified in the App Store. One nice thing is that we have between our release, we have a kind of like internal package postfix, so it's distinguished between the actual go to the Play Store and download your app. What that does is it allows us to have on my personal phone, I like to fiddle with our internal version of the app, but it doesn't force me to uninstall the production one. So in terms of actually like getting to the App Store, maybe I'll dive into a little bit of the Play Store console. Anyone looking to launch their apps for the first time, I'll call out two big things.
Yeah, this is going to be pretty helpful, I think, for a lot of people.
Sure. One, make a toy app that you never plan to release. Make the package name not the package name that you plan to release. And two, use Google Play signing. So big, like flashing alarm. If you mess up signing the first time, you have to deploy your app as a totally separate app. And so what I mean by that is if you have, let's say, com.google.maps, and that's the app you want to create, and you create your keys for that app, and then you upload it to the Play Store for the very first time, even in the internal track, and you say, and let's say you lose your keys or something. No one in the universe is allowed to upload another app with a different key using that package ID, including you. And you can call Google support. You can, escalate it with, everyone. You'll never be able to reclaim that package ID. So I guess solid piece of advice. I would say while you're figuring out the Play Store specifically, as well as the kind of the App Store Connect equivalent, I would say definitely kind of give yourself a little bit of flex by, testing in a throwaway app, let's say. So that sounds pretty scary, right? Lose your key, you're never getting your app over. You have to relaunch United Healthcare Mobile under a totally separate App Store listing, lose all your reviews, lose all your user base. You have to tell your users to download the app over there that looks the same. So that's a pretty bad spot to be in. So what's one thing that Google started offering a few years ago is what they call, forgetting the name, but I think Play Store signing. And I would recommend doing that. It prompts you to do it for the first time. I would definitely heed that advice. But what that is you generate your key and you give it to Google. And you never touch that key again. You build your app with a new key. And then when you upload the app built with that, they'll kind of do some magic on the back end to swap out the real app with your real key.
So it sounds like they recognized this was a pretty serious issue and they created a fix for it, huh? Oh,
yeah, I'm sure. So I bet if you Google, lost my key, how do I fix this? And I think the number one Stack Overflow is, sorry, you can't. So the benefit of that is since Google kind of has, your key locked behind their doors, what they can do is you can, if you lose that fake key, they can swap it out for you. Yeah. So that's one of the benefits of that system.
Cool. And what about for iOS? And I'm kind of curious, do you actually build the app and then upload it? You have someone actually like logs into the console and uploads the new versions themselves, or is this automated as well in some way?
Yeah, so both of them are kind of manual for releases. So we don't have a once weekly cadence for launches. So the actual manual step isn't too big of a deal. There are Play Console APIs where you can do this in an automated fashion, as well as we don't use Fastlane for things like this. But that Fastlane, listeners might be familiar with this, it's a wrapper around mobile tooling. So usually it's used for mobile. I guess you could use it for other things, but it's kind of a task runner wrapper for both Android and iOS. So that's definitely a tool worth looking into if you're looking to do these Play Store uploads, App Store uploads in an automated fashion. But specifically for the Android, that's pretty manual. We build in Jenkins, we check a box that says App Store build, and then we upload that that APK to the Play Store. And then the iOS is a little bit different. That's definitely documentation lacking on Apple's part, I think, there. We definitely did some scrambling. Cindy, you want to talk to that a bit?
Yeah, for sure. So the Android build, we have 3 similar flavors of builds that we do: debug, release, and App Store. For the release to the App Store, we create that on like a private build server that we have, since you need an actual Mac machine to generate the IPA for your app to be able to upload. So we have a private server set up to run a series of like Fastlane commands and things like that to get our app signed and archived and distributed. And that just generates the build artifact that we then manually upload to the App Store.
Interesting. And I think a lot of the experience I've had has been very similar to what you all are kind of talking about. So it's good to know that we're on a similar page.
Yeah, and I would say the lose assert on Google is a lot scarier, but I think we all kind of definitely felt a little bit drowning in how like the confusing nature of the iOS side.
Yeah, I think
I still can't get a straight answer. Oh, go ahead.
The one huge difference for me as far as like mobile and web development is the deployment process and how easy it is on the web versus how difficult it was for me in the React Native / mobile space, especially at first, because you just don't know how the stuff works and a lot of configurations that happen, and you have to kind of understand everything that's going on, or else you make mistakes that are hard to go back and fix.
For sure.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the resources out there for how to get things built in continuous integration don't specifically speak to like challenges that you might run into building like a React Native mobile app. A lot of them are like things that you see on Just Native. So I think some of those things, getting a new build scheme working for our App Store configuration on iOS was a challenge because not a lot of community resources addressed like how to get the static libraries from React to get compiled in your new configuration or in your new scheme and things like that. So definitely a lot of points which to learn.
That's great. And I think that, like that you point all that stuff out because a lot of this stuff is not intuitive. Like it's hard stuff to figure out, and you have to do a lot of digging, I think. Even though React Native has been around for a while, it still has a lot of rough edges when it comes to doing certain things, and I think this is one of those things. But I think that you mentioned that you're working with CallSec with maybe some of their consultants. I think that having some really specialized people that have had quite a bit of experience doing this type of stuff at first especially is really good to have, and then you can kind of like learn from them and then take it from there. Or even having just one or two just to lean on in general is always seems like a good thing to have. Absolutely,
yeah. We have a massive debt to just both CallStack as well as support from the native engineers at Rally. How does OS X work? How does Xcode do the thing? For sure.
Yeah, totally. And even having like the fact that you mentioned the native engineers is pretty important for some of the medium to larger apps that I've worked with. Either having that support around or even having a consultant or a native developer on the team full-time will also be a huge help because even though we're writing JavaScript, there's still a lot of native tooling, but also some native code that you have to mess with, right? So having someone around that kind of understands this on a fundamental level they've been doing it for years, they can kind of spot things and make the process much easier.
Absolutely, yep.
So before we start wrapping up and getting to the picks, is there anything else that you all wanted to touch on that we haven't really covered so far?
Sure. I would like to touch on analytics, which is the crucial thing in our app. So basically, analytics is very essential for any app, is my perspective, because it helps you understand the user's behavior and which parts of the app they're using, which parts they aren't, and how they're using our app. So it kind of provides a business justifications on why this app is being used and which part is being used. For example, a user logs in. Is he checking his claims or is he finding a provider? Like, what is he doing with our app? That helps us identify on which areas we need to focus on. And based on that, we can plan our next sprint based on how the user is using our app and based on his real-time feedback. And when it comes to analytics, so we have events to analyze data. So basically, event is an important occurrence in our app. So any page load or any particular screen that is loaded, you can call that an event. So every event will have a set of user properties that will help us identify what kind of user, the app user. So event is basically an important occurrence of our app. And then each event could be a unique page load or any page navigation that the user is loading or any screen on our app. It depends on us what we call an event. So each event will have a set of user properties that could be details about the user being based on what platform or what device he's using or what age group the user is in. And based on these, we kind of analyze what is the retention rate, what are the monthly active users, and if we need to focus on certain features or remove certain features. It helps us plan a lot, and it actually tells us what we need to do next. So I feel analytics is really, really crucial for any app, and I feel they need to spend time on working on analytics before releasing an app.
Yeah, and I'll add that it was significantly impactful. Around late last year, we started noticing like tanking reviews. 1 star is all centered around can't log in, can't log in, can't log in, and without any of this logging instrumented in our app, we would have basically no context for, login service is down, what have you. But thanks to our extensive logging, we were able to identify that our login service not just didn't handle a specific population of users, but treated it as kind of a server error. So, we were prompting users to try logging in again when the backend, login service was like, no, we definitely don't support this type of user. So we were able to, react to that and issue a quick app update with better error handling and more focused messaging, description like, here's why you can't log in, try using the website or using this other app where your population is supported. Yeah.
So I think one thing that people have a problem with when they're setting up analytics is they don't know what to track. Like, what are some good events to track? I know you mentioned the events. Like, what are some of the most important events that you're taking into consideration?
So for us, obviously, every page load was an important event for us. And apart from that, we would see how they navigate once they log in and which areas of the app they are using. Apart from that, we also have something called custom events. So custom events are events that uniquely matter to us. And for example, a user logs in and we're seeing that he's going through the registration workflow. And during registration, he contacts customer support. And at that point of time, we know at this point, the user is facing some difficulties and he contacted customer support. And then what we do is we analyze this situation and we talk to a product owner saying that, hey, how can we improve this? Why are the users contacting customer support at this point? So that helps us identify issues with our app. It could be UI issues, design issues, or workflow issues, functionality issues. It could be anything. So all these will help us analyze and help us improve our app.
So do you do any type of messaging or push notifications based on these analytics? Or are these more just for kind of understanding how users are interacting with the app?
Yeah, so right now, we don't instrument, we don't have any push notifications or in-app messaging, and that touches on one of the biggest opportunities we have right now, because one other thing that we learned, in development that, any mobile developer will tell you is we don't have any control over users updating their app. So essentially what that means is if we, ship out a 1.0.0 and on page 3, there's a 100% reproducible crash. We could issue a bug fix, on web, you'd say, oh, we'll just release a new version of the web front end and fix the crash. On web, users refresh the browser, come to it new, they get the newest version of the app. On mobile, there's a unique challenge where we have no control over the update lifecycle of users. So if we have 1.0.0 and on page 3, there's a crash 100% of the time, we could push that, bug fix, crash fix out there. No way to force users onto that version of the app. So that's, pretty unique from the mobile landscape. So what's a common pattern, which is, super important to have, from the first version of the app, is some mechanism to handle that outside of the actual app lifecycle. So we have what we call a hard blocking and soft blocking, where we have an external server-based configuration service that marks what's the lowest soft version of the app and the lowest hard version of the app. And what that means is if we decide, okay, we're launching version 2.0, we want to make sure that nobody tries to use 1.0. Let's say we're deprecating one of the old endpoints that the app uses or something. What we can do is we can go on that server-based, configuration and mark 2.0 as the hard block version. And what that means is we had built into the 1.0 version of the app to check the service and make sure that the version that's running is like basically still okay with us. So right now, if we mark the latest version as a hard block version, old users of the app who have old versions would get a modal on login saying, hey, there's a newer version of this app, go to the App Store and update it.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Now, so, that's definitely heavy-handed. So we want to avoid that as much as possible. We also have soft versions where it's like, hey, just suggesting, like, hey, you could update the app. It's not urgent right now. Maybe we could use that as like a, soft, like good way to get there, basically. So that's one thing definitely to, be aware of. And also, it's maybe you don't want to do that every time you need an update, but maybe you want to do it to reduce the number of variables in the wild. We might have 6 different versions of the app right now. Well, we don't want to support ticket for an old version of the app. So what a lot of companies do is, have only the last 2 versions supported, and then kind of like edge people closer and closer towards the newer versions. But the big thing to call out is that there's basically no built-in support for that. And if you want, V1 to be able to have that functionality, it kind of has to be built into version 1.
Got you. That makes sense.
And that's also definitely impacted our communication process with the backend services. So we rely on different teams who manage our backend services. So it's made us definitely very, very, very aware of even potentially breaking changes, because we don't have control over these old versions of the app. And we like to, reserve that hard blocking functionality until it's absolutely, absolutely necessary. So it's definitely forced us to be a lot more, I would say, disciplined about breaking changes to endpoints, to the point where, if we need to, let's say the web is like, we absolutely cannot support this anymore, then, we might have some type of middleware that kind of bridges that gap, just to make sure that, the users on the old version of the app are still well supported.
So what are you using actually before we wrap it up? I'm just kind of curious. You're also using Crashlytics and Fabric, I guess, for the actual analytics?
We have Crashlytics for that kind of daily active user, monthly active users, like how many times the app has crashed. But for the actual intentional or surgical instrumentation of analytics, we use Amplitude.
Ah, interesting. Okay. I don't think I've had any experience with Amplitude.
Yeah, it's pretty neat. Shyam, you want to maybe mention some of the cool dashboards and visualizations we have from that?
Sure. Amplitude provides abundance of data. Like, it shows you, it has neat graphs, it has a nice UI, it shows if you're making any erroneous calls, it has good validations of what kind of requests you do. Apart from that, like in terms of a product owner kind of view, it tells you unique users, what's the age range, retention, number of new app installs, new users, and you can actually kind of segregate, like you can add filters, it's like a SQL filter where you can add queries, and based on your query, it spits out a nice graph and data based on what you need. So if I want an MNR user that logged in during this and this time, and if he had a crash, you can just write a query for that, and then Amplitude will give out nice data for that.
Yeah, and one of the really cool things that we have is what you'd call a funnel. So we have the registration funnel where, X many number of users start at the top of the funnel. They click the register button. Okay, and they go to the next screen, and they see the personal information. Oh, I got to put in 5 things. And you can kind of see like, about 80% of people made it through that step. And then 60 people made it to the next step. So you can kind of see like, a lot of people are dropping off here. Maybe that's an opportunity to improve the messaging or break up kind of the data entry flow.
Oh, nice. Yeah, that's super important actually.
And also our web team uses Amplitude, so it kind of helps us easily build this. And it's easier for the product owners as well to analyze this data. So they can easily transition from web to mobile and create filters based on that.
Yeah, so it's kind of all in one place.
Right.
That's interesting too. That's actually a pretty big deal, because it seems like the analytics space is pretty distinct between what people are using for web and what people are using for mobile. I'm not sure the enterprise space, but I know even small to medium-sized companies that I know on the web are using Google Analytics. And I'm not sure if there's an easy way to transition Google Analytics into something like React Native. So,
yeah, I'm not sure. Oh, but yeah, I think having the two analytics platforms on the same, I guess, two analytics across mobile and web on the same platform, this thing is nice for things like to be able to compare, usage across. For example, one feature we were, building the web app, we're like, oh, well, web doesn't use that feature too much, but that feature existed in another version of the app. And we're like, oh, for some reason, people on mobile use this feature a ton. So yeah, it is important to have it in. Whereas if it was, if we were just looking at, web data, we might have made a different decision.
All right. So I think we're kind of getting close to time. So I think we'll go ahead and jump to the picks. I'll start with myself, I guess. My pick is going to be a app that I kind of built just to kind of show off some cool stuff with GraphQL subscriptions called Hypebeats. And you can go to hypebeats.dev. It's actually being deployed right now. And by the time this podcast is out, it'll be live. And play around with it. You can kind of create these beat boxes, share them with people, and then they can actually update those in real time. And then the code is on my GitHub repo at hype-beats. And I have a couple of versions of it. I have one that includes routing, so you can kind of dynamically create these. And then I have one that's just the beatbox by itself. So I guess I'll jump next to Shyam. Do you have any picks today?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, what's on my mind at this point is I would love developers if they focused really on their IDEs. So basically, I mentioned that because configuring your IDE properly is really essential. Like all the plugins and plugins like Prettier, Flow, Linting, Reactotron, everything needs to be set up properly before you start working on something. I feel, spending a couple of hours at least on your IDE will save a lot of time in the future. So that's my point of view.
Cool. Cindy, do you have any picks?
Yeah, I've got a non-tech related one, I guess. I've been reading this series of books called The Inheritance Trilogy by N.K. Jemisin. It's like a speculative fiction trilogy, gods and relationships and all sorts of things. It's really great. Highly recommend it.
All right. Ryan, do you have any picks?
Yeah, sure. I changed mine while we were talking. we were talking about some of the iOS build stuff. And I remembered a very old Tumblr that our team found. It hasn't been updated, I think, since 2017, but it is full of great laughs. It's a text from xcode.com. And it's a bunch of those fake back and forth, chats, texts and it's kind of just parodizing all of the ridiculous error messages from Xcode.
Funny. I just pulled it up when you mentioned that, and it's pretty funny.
And that actually led us to another one, which was, I'll have to find the name of it, but it was, I think some developer's dad is a voice actor. So he had his dad narrate all of the ridiculous, error messages.
All right. Well, I think that wraps up this show. So first of all, thanks to Rally Health, and thanks for all three of you all for taking the time out of your schedule to kind of join us and talk about this. I think this is a really, really useful conversation that we haven't really had yet on React Native Radio, and I think it'll be really helpful for a lot of people.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
All right. Well, that wraps up this episode of React Native Radio. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you all next week.